That's right, folks. My name is Christopher Anderson, and welcome to this edition of the Shabbat War Room. Look, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. Right now, we're kind of getting out of the order. Typically, we do every 2 weeks. But the wonderful thing about having your own program and having a slot set aside for you every week is that you can do it every 2 weeks or you can do it every week. And I was kind of feeling really impressed today, as a matter of fact, to give this show tonight about the Syrian Refugee Crisis, looking at that specifically in a lot more detail. You see, what's going on in the world is it's not something that has become a coincidence. It's not just happening because all these events are taking place and that's forcing everyone out. This is planned. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you understand this, and I'm hoping by the end of this broadcast you will. What is happening with the Syrian refugee crisis in Europe and soon to be America, it's all a plan. And what's more disturbing, it is a plan by America and the Sunni nations. That's right, you heard me correct. And what's so important to understand is, as we're looking at this refugee crisis, as we're looking at them and saying these Islamic terrorists are creeping in with them, that this is a Trojan horse event, something that I discussed last week, we have to also understand that the cultural impact is just as devastating as the religious impact of what's happening. And in order for us to understand the cultural aspect of those who are coming into America and flooding Europe, we have to look at where they come. We have to look at the mindset, who these people are. You see, Islam is a major aspect, religion, Islam is a major aspect of the culture and the community of the Muslim people. But it's not the totality of their culture and who they are. We have to understand this. You see, in World War II, Americans did not typically accept Japanese, German, or Italian refugees in masses fleeing from Europe. Of course, yes, we did accept German Jews who were being persecuted, minus one occasion in 1939 before Pearl Harbor, and America came into the war when we turned back a ship full of German Jews back to Europe. That was the only instance that we didn't accept a group of refugees prior to World War II as far as America's involvement. As a matter of fact, in America, Japanese Americans were placed in internment camps. That's right, they were rounded up and bussed off to camps in the West Coast, and they were interned there for the duration of the war. They were in makeshift prisons. That's what America did in a wartime footing. So why, might you ask, are we accepting Syrian refugees who are fleeing the war in Syria? That's a great question. Because though we're not at war with the country or the nation of Syria, we are at war with terrorism. More specifically, even though the Democratic candidates will not acknowledge this, against Islamic extremism, Islamic jihad terrorism. But to be able to separate jihad from the core principles of Islam, you can't do it. It cannot happen. Jihad is a core aspect of Islam. And a core aspect of Islam is also Hajra, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that is jihad through immigration. So, having that mindset that you can't separate jihad from Islam, you can't separate immigration jihad, which is a form of jihad, immigration jihad from Islam, then what we see here is an Islamic movement, the jihad, literally and figuratively. So, what do these refugees really represent? Like, what is their ideas? What are they doing? These roughly 9 million refugees from Syria. Like, what's their mindset? Why are they fleeing? And why is a lot of these military-aged men. You know, I hear so often, unfortunately, it's a terrible thing, but I have friends on Facebook from when I was in high school that are not Christians. Matter of fact, the one I'm thinking of specifically is Wiccan. And I read a comment that she posted the other day, and it really didn't sit well with me. I didn't say anything, I didn't respond, but that comment kind of helped spur the broadcast for tonight. You see, what she had said is, if Christians represent love, then why are we all up in arms to send away these refugees who are fleeing a war zone? And then she made a comment, your Savior, wouldn't approve of your actions. And I thought for a minute, and there's many actions that we as Christians in America do that Messiah Yeshua would not be proud of. Let's face it, folks. How many people follow the prosperity gospel being preached and emanated from the mega churches throughout America? That's coming forth and being spewed forth from our television sets. People like Pastor Joel Osteen, like Creflo Dollar, saying how we should be able to prosper financially in the world now, and that there was even a quote I read from Creflo Dollar that stated that Jesus died so that we would have financial prosperity in the here and now. At a later broadcast, I'm going to be discussing the sons of Eli and the Samuels. And these men, Creflo Dollar, Pastor Joel Osteen, all representatives of the sons of Eli. But we listen to these false gospels. Would Yeshua be ashamed? That's not what he preached. He preached you cannot love God and serve mammon. You cannot love God and money. So his prosperity gospel is certainly not compatible with Scripture. Would Yeshua be proud of what we do in America, what we teach, what do we espouse from the pulpits? Absolutely not. But in the situation with the Syrian refugees, and my friend's comment, would your Savior be pleased? I have to remark that he wouldn't be pleased with the entire situation surrounding everything. But the Christian response that we have to vet them out, we have to somehow identify the good and from the bads, and not allow the bad ones in this country, but welcome those who are not necessarily bad or evil. That is about as far as it goes. We are doing what we can with the compassion we have while trying to maintain a security mindset. Which brings me to explain a little bit some stories for you. So I'm going to share some war stories tonight, and I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of these things I haven't told very many people, and so for me to get on here tonight and tell some of these stories for the world to hear, it's going to be kind of difficult because I think these things are really personal, which is why I haven't shared it with very many people, but a very select few have heard them. But we're going to start with the idea of vetting through the Syrian refugees to see who's good and who's bad. In Afghanistan and in Iraq, the different bases, we have what we call TCNs. Those are third country nationals. So what that represents is people from India or from other nations who are coming in and doing this food preparation, laundry services, and various other little services they had at some of the larger bases in the countries. Some of these forward operating bases or FOBs, and definitely, like for the grunts, for instance, when they're out in the field, they really didn't have these services. These are mainly for places like Kandahar Airfield or Bagram Air Base or Camp Leatherneck, and those are in Afghanistan, or you get like Al-Assad in Iraq, and Camp Victory in Iraq, places like that. These larger facilities had third country nationals. But they also had locals that would come and go to the base, and they would set up their bazaars, or they would provide, labor, cheap labor. A lot of the things we did over there for the local community was meant to build prosperity there, to establish a relationship between the military presence in the community they were in. But there was a vetting process that everybody outside of military personnel had to go through in order to gain access on base. Okay? This is something that you saw all the time in the field, and if anybody listening, happened to be in infantry in the Army or the Marines or Air Force or even the Navy, that the different infantry, EOD, whoever you are that were pushed out with ground pounders, you're going to kind of understand what I'm talking about. But there was a biometrics scanning process that everybody went through. So they would get an iris scan of your eyeball. You get a thumbprint or fingerprint from your hands, and you'd obviously state your name. And this would be incorporating somebody into a massive database. And if something happened later on down the road involving someone that was in this database, they could be classified as, a terrorist or a terrorist affiliate or something of that nature, and they would be denied access to any military installation. Now, this is a good practice when you think about it in terms of preventative action, or even being able to identify somebody later on in the process. So, I get, example, if I put my biometrics in and then I go and blow somebody up or start, shooting people or planting an IED, my information's in the data, in the data bank. So when they find me, they can identify me for who I am, and I couldn't get onto a base and I'd be arrested. But this does not work for those who are not in the database. So what America is doing by vetting through these 10,000 refugees that are coming, and many of them who have already begun coming into the States as of last Friday to New Orleans, Louisiana, they're putting them in this database. But unless they are already in the database from the past, there is no way of knowing if they have terrorist ties, if they themselves are a part of ISIS or any other terrorist organization. There's no way to know that. They have to be they have to be suspect by the FBI or the CIA or Department of Homeland Security. They have to already be in a system or be suspect to be vetted out at this point. But many of them won't be. This is how you get sleeper cells to infiltrate a nation. This is how you get the Paris attacker who got through with a Syrian passport and committed murder, 130 people, him and his group, that they killed last week. So vetting them out is not going to be the most effective means of determining who's who. It is simply a means of cataloging those who come in the country. That's it. That does not stop them from coming in. It does not stop them from committing an act of terrorism on American soil. It doesn't do any of that. To separate the military-aged men who are compromising the majority of the refugees from the women and children, that's great. But this past week we had 3 female suicide bombers blow themselves up. That's right, 3. So women are just as likely to commit acts of terrorism as the men are. And I'm going to share some stories about children who can be just as violent. So my first story I'm going to share, again, this happened in my first deployment. I was gone to Afghanistan for a year between 2009 and 2010. For 9 months of that deployment, I was stationed on Kandahar Airfield in the Kandahar province in Afghanistan. The last 3 months, they sent me to Camp Leatherneck. We became Camp Leatherneck. We were building all that up. It was Camp Bastion under the guidance and the management, if you will, of the British military. But Camp Leatherneck was the Marine side. I was an aviation Marine, so I worked on all makes and models of aircraft. I was intermediate level maintenance. So I didn't get outside of the FOB or outside of the bases very often. Now I did do escorting duty. I escorted classified material between bases on different flights. I did a few things here and there, but for the most part, my duties kept me in Kandahar Airfield or Camp Leatherneck, Camp Bastion. My first deployment, first 9 months in Kandahar Airfield. The Marines that I was with, the group, we were a bridging force for the special MAGTAF, which MAGTAF is Marine Air Ground Task Force, which is a very small component to an entire group. Kind of hard to explain some things in military terms you might not understand, so forgive me. Essentially, we were bridging a gap between a small contingent of military personnel to a very large contingent, the buildup. So where we slept was on a complete opposite end from where we worked, so we had to take a bus a couple of miles around the airfield. We drove around the perimeter of the wire all the time to get to where we were at. One of the evenings after my shift was over and I was headed back to, we called them the cans, back to where I slept, it was myself and 4 other Marines. We were sitting on what you would think of, you see, as a concrete barrier, like you would see in the roads that divide, one lane, one direction from another, just concrete barriers. We were, 3 of the guys were sitting on the concrete barrier. One, who was a military policeman, not a part of my unit, he was sitting beside me and I was out front. I was a senior guy there, the sergeant. Everybody else was corporals, lance corporals, and I think there was a PFC there as well, private first class. Excuse me. And we were sitting there talking, and we noticed a line of trucks coming towards us. These were big dump trucks. We called them jingle trucks because they were painted very colorful. They had, on the inside, they had the trimming along the windows, had little tassels all over them, and then they had a lot of, I don't know what they're called, but things that hung down with little, almost like plastic, fake, reflective items. Litter them. We call them jingle trucks because they move. They make a jingling sound because of all the stuff hanging off of them. But we saw this line of jingle trucks coming that were dump trucks, and they got pretty close. And the lead truck, the guy looked at us and made eye contact with us, and then took his steering wheel. Mind you, it was a big dump truck. Yanks the wheel and slams into that concrete barrier we were 3 of my Marines were sitting on, and I was standing in front of, and another Marine was standing behind. The thing spun around. We all had to jump out of the way. I jumped out of the way and, barely missed getting hit by the concrete barrier spinning around. The truck missed me by about 3 feet. One of my Marines got his legs out of the way, and the truck missed him by inches. He would have been crushed if he would have been a second slower. A couple of the Marines rolled off the back, and we kind of got away. He swerved, hit it, got back on the road, and kept on going down the road. Now, this was a guy who had gone through the whole process, had his biometrics taken. He was allowed to be on base. He was considered a good guy, a good Muslim. He was on our side, a good Haji. But this guy just tried to kill 5 Marines waiting for a bus by running them over with a dump truck. I get kind of it's hard to relive in some of those things. But he was considered a normal, everyday Muslim, a good guy. No threat. Another instance, again, as I mentioned, we drove by the perimeter, about the outside wire all the time, and you would see camels out in herds. You'd see a big bunch of camels just walking by, and every now and then you'd see a Muslim or a Haji, we called them Hajis, an Afghan, with the camel with the flock, and sometimes you would see sheep or goats going. And this particular day, we saw a group of goats and sheep, a mixture. We saw an older gentleman, looked like grandfather of this child. He looked probably about 12 years old. They were by a small stream that was right by the wire. There's some vegetation growing there, so it was placed for the flock to get some water and nibble on some grass. And this kid was just right close to the wire, probably 4 feet away from it. And, we saw some water bottles kind of laying by him. It looked like possibly he was thirsty because, again, by this water source, it was contaminated water. It was very bad for him. And we saw empty bottled waters there, so we figured, they had run out of water for themselves. and they needed some water because he was right there by the fence. It seemed like he wanted some water, so we slowed down and came to a crawl, and we got bottles of water out, and we threw them over the fence. Said, "Here you go, have a nice day." Of course, he didn't understand what we were saying, so the water comes over, lands next to him. He just comes right at the gate, yelling and screaming and throwing rocks at us. We got out of there pretty quick because we did notice that he had an SKS rifle. It wasn't right by him. It was over by his grandfather, but there was a weapon there, and he was throwing rocks at us. It took us by surprise because we thought we were doing a good thing, but it turned out that this kid was pretty vicious. Now, there's many people who've deployed, and this is not always the case with children, but you see a lot of children that are very vicious. As a matter of fact, not too long ago, two group of kids, Palestinian kids, stabbed an Israeli security guard on a bus. Stabbed him up. The guard pulled out his weapon, shot one of them, and made the other one, stop what he was doing. But it goes to show that kids can be just as aggressive as the parents. Not always. You want to give the benefit of a doubt there. But in my experience, kids can be just as aggressive. Another story regarding a kid. We were at a bazaar. They had these little magnetic things about this big. They would throw them up in the air, and they would spin together and make a fun sound and come together. And this kid, he had to be about probably 10, 11 years old maybe. He was at the bazaar with everybody else. They were selling items to soldiers and Marines, and we were there just enjoying it, shopping around, seeing what was there, help the local populace. And this kid was wanting us to go buy these magnets, and he was having a good time throwing them up and listening to the sound, and people were buying the items from him, and we go over there and we're looking at it and we're thinking about buying these items, and out of nowhere, I don't know if it was a father or somebody else in the family or just a random male, comes at this kid and just takes his hand and smacks this boy on the side of the head, that's right in this area. Nearly took the boy off both of his feet. He went down on his knees, but it nearly took him off his feet. He nearly ended up sideways. I mean, that man hauled back. He had a good 3 or 4 foot swing and smacked this kid. Me and my buddies that were there that saw this got so upset, but we knew we couldn't do anything about it. But we got so angry because of what this man did. We ended up turning around and leaving and just left the place because we were infuriated that this guy would smack this innocent kid like he did. The kid was doing nothing but making money, trying to make a living. And he gets treated like that. But you see, that's the culture. That's the culture. So what's going to happen when these Syrian refugees are in the middle of Texas or somewhere in the south or even in the north, and a little boy or a little girl being kids, having fun, laughing, enjoying life, and they do something that irks their parents or goes against the culture, and the parent hauls back and punches them in the face and knocks them down? What do you think a good old boy is going to do? What do you think an average red-blooded American male is going to do? They're going to step in and do something about it. And it's going to spark a national controversy because an American beat the snot out of a Syrian refugee for exercising their cultural understanding in the streets of America. That's going to happen, folks. It happens every day. Every day. You see this culture over there, they have and this is going to be something that's going to be hard for you to accept, and this is going to get kind of graphic, but we need to know what's going to come into America. We need to know what President Obama is so anxious to get here, and we need to know as a church what's happening so we can counter this. Nobody else will. And it's time the church get off her butt and do something. So we need to know what's happening. So overseas, in the Middle East in general, Afghanistan, Iraq, both places have this. They're called chai boys. What it is typically a young boy between the age of 10 and 13 who is used for the sexual pleasure of males. You heard me correct. Young boys who are essentially sex slaves. Don't believe me? Look up the story that recently happened of the Green Beret first sergeant that was discharged from the military, forced out because him and his captain in 2011 approached a Afghan police commander from the Kunduz province because he was raping this boy, this 11-year-old boy, repeatedly. And when he was confronted about it, he laughed it off and said, "This is what we do. This is our culture." The captain shoved him away, and the first sergeant body slammed the dude. He went running out. That's their culture, folks. Look at your children tonight. Do you want that to be your son or daughter? Women in their culture, if they're raped, the women are killed for being raped. For being the victim, they're killed. Do you want that to be your daughter or your wife? That's what's happening, folks. That is the culture that is sweeping across Europe. Don't believe me? In 2011, Oslo, Norway, 100% of the reported rapes were by Muslim immigrants, Muslim refugees. 100% of the rapes. The rape epidemic in Norway has skyrocketed when they opened their borders to Muslim refugees. What do you think is happening in Germany? A rape epidemic. These men in Greece are yanking old women out by their hair from cars, packing their cars, stealing their cars, and driving to Germany. Germany is a staging point, a launching point, because Germany is the heart of the European Union. Germany is being overwhelmed, and their leader does nothing about it but open her arms. Ladies and gentlemen, America is next. Hug your children tonight. Hug your wife. Because their lives, their safety is on the line, because President Obama will not accept the fact that a majority of these people, based on their culture, that their understanding and perspective of the world runs counterindicative to the American culture. Do I think we shouldn't accept them on the basis of culture? Absolutely. But here's what I do know about that. If they're willing to change their culture and conform to America and American culture and ideology and understanding, by all means, let them in. This is how the country became great, because we are diverse, because we made up of many different ethnic groups, many religions, many cultures. Out of many, one is what it says on the Statue of Liberty. But we are an American culture, an American nation, an English-speaking nation, a Judeo-Christian nation. But why should that matter? Because obviously we've let that all go anyway. President Obama says we are no longer a Christian nation, but a nation of many religions. Many places throughout the South have to speak Spanish because immigrants refuse to learn English. You might be looking at me tonight and saying, man, this guy's getting really racial. He's getting prejudice on this. No, I'm not. This is the way it was for many years. How many legal immigrants out there went through the process of becoming a U.S. citizen? The years of paperwork, the process, the tests. And now we're letting them in willy-nilly. They're just flooding the gates. There was a report I read today. Excuse me. In Texas, I wrote it down on my yellow notebook, which with my background, my chroma key, it kind of looks transparent. I'm using a green screen. But back to what I was saying. That's the wrong page. All right, so I was reading today that Syrian refugees were found at the Texas border coming in from Mexico. Their passports were found. If they found a group now, how many have already come in illegally? As a matter of fact, with the open porous borders, how many ISIS terrorists are already in the country? The FBI says there's plenty, that every state has some. That's scary, folks. And they were going to let in flood of Syrian refugees? Now, the big question I have is, why can't Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Qatar, these rich Muslim countries, why don't they let them in? Because they have a very similar culture, a very similar religious system, beating kids in public, using kids as sex slaves, killing wives and women for being raped, throwing homosexuals off the top of buildings. That type of cultural thing is fairly accepted in these other countries. Why don't they go there? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get into some stuff here in just a few minutes that's going to begin to blow the lid off of what the regime has been doing and what we have barely know about as a whole in this nation. Something that, if it got out, could destroy the Obama administration. If you want to know what that is, stay with me. I'll be right back.
Seen it. Christians sleeping on a Sunday morning. Maybe they forgot their first cup of coffee. Maybe they were out a little too late last night. But did you know that Jesus foresaw much more than an occasional Christian taking a nap? In Matthew 25:5, he said, "The bridegroom was a long time in coming, so they all became drowsy and fell asleep." In this verse from the parable of the 10 virgins, Jesus is clearly teaching that before his return, the whole church will be asleep. Not just the foolish virgins, but the wise as well. It was this verse that turned my whole thinking upside down. No matter how I looked at it, no matter what commentary I read, no one had an adequate answer for what this verse was teaching. Denomination presidents, seminary professors, pastors, everyone in the pews. Jesus is telling us we're all snoozing. So why is the church asleep? And what are the consequences? This parable is the emperor's new clothes of the New Testament. No one wants to deal with what it really says. But it was this passage and other passages just like it that led me to a jarring conclusion. If Jesus came back today, the church would not be ready. Now, I realize this is a very scandalous statement. If we're not ready for Jesus, we have a problem on our hands. You see, Jesus taught that only the virgins who were ready would go in with him to the wedding banquet. Yet, in churches all over the world, almost no effort is going into preparing for the most important day in history, the day that Jesus comes back. So are we ready? Do we even know what ready means? I urge you to be skeptical. See for yourself what Jesus' own words have to say on the matter. It's a strange topic, but Jesus' words sounded strange to the listeners of his day as well. Are we really all that different? There's more at stake than I ever imagined. After all, what could be more important than being ready for Jesus? Let's find out together what it's going to take for the church to shake off this 2,000-year-old path.
Ladies and gentlemen, 130 people killed last Friday in Paris this time. On the 18th of this month, 2 days ago, 32 people were killed and 80 injured in a Boko Haram bombing in Nigeria. Yesterday in Tel Aviv in the West Bank, 3 were killed in a mass stabbing, one of which was a teenager from Boston. On the 31st of October, the Russian jetliner was blown out of the sky by an ISIS bomb, killing 224 people. Today, in Mali's capital, 27 people were killed. These al-Qaeda-linked terrorists in the Mali attack let people go who can quote verses from the Quran. A Syrian passport was found on one of the dead Paris attackers in the theater where the majority of these people were killed. WND News reports from other news agencies as well that American pilots flying combat missions in Iraq and Syria confirmed that President Barack Hussein Obama blocked 75% of the ISIS targets given for airstrikes. Islam is being taught in schools all across America. A Fox News report today, under the title Students Forced to Learn, Song Promoting Islam, talks about how teachers are writing poetry that have Islamic and Muslim overtones to them, and the kids have to recite it. Children are coming home to their parents and saying, God is great, Allahu Akbar. There is no God but Allah, and I will serve him. Children are coming home from American schools and saying that. Another school recently, this is in this Fox News report, you got to read it. Again, the Fox News report is called Students Forced to Learn, Song Promoting Islam. A teacher in another school district had her students draw an Islamic State flag and then on the back of it write Islamic State propaganda. Can you imagine what it would have said? ISIS, it's explosive. The teacher got reprimanded, and that's great, but where is the outcry from these atheist organizations? Oh, that's right. It's only against Christian teaching in schools, saying having the Ten Commandments out there, saying the Lord's Prayer, saying we're in one nation under God, Bibles in school, prayers in school, to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. That's the only thing that's banned in this country in schools, but we will promote Islam. Excuse me just a second. I'm getting over a cold. You got to forgive me. So what does all this mean? Now, I've been following this thing with Islam being taught in schools for a little bit now, and it's happened in Tennessee, California, Colorado, different places throughout, Florida. There is an Islamic imam, and I forget his name, and I believe it's in this article from Fox News. who says that this is a silent jihad, where the next generation of children are becoming Allah worshippers, are accepting Allah and Muhammad. It's in our schools, people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is in our schools. They kicked God out and replaced him with Allah, who is Lucifer, masked as the Islamic God. That's what's happening. Read it. Fox News. Students forced to learn song promoting Islam. Read that in Fox News. Search this stuff out. Don't just listen to me. Search this stuff out. This is happening. Excuse me again. You see, ladies and gentlemen, President Obama is very upset with the 31 governors in the 31 states who said they will not accept Muslim Syrian refugees into their states. And as great as it makes many of us feel that our elected leadership in the state level is standing up and saying this is not going to happen, the fact is it's the U.S. Department of Immigration that has the final say-so, which is a federal organization. Therefore, it would be up to the governors to deploy the National Guard to prevent these things from happening, to round them up and send them back to ICE to be shipped out and go somewhere else. But do you think President Obama is going to do that? No. I saw a video from an Egyptian news agency yesterday. It was highlighting a press conference President Obama had here in the States not too terribly long ago, when he was asked the question about national security, and he said the greatest threat to the world and our own national security is climate change. They cut the clip, and it goes back to these Egyptian news broadcasters, and they're laughing. A retired Egyptian general was slamming his fist on the table, irate that America would allow our leadership, in the face of all this terrorism, in the face of Islam, the Islamic Revolution, the Caliphate, all the death and destruction in the Middle East, saying that the number one threat in the world and to America is climate change. Now you tell me, why haven't we impeached that guy yet? Why hasn't the American people stood up and said enough is enough and get rid of him? That is our right as American citizen, a right that I fought for and I went to Afghanistan for a year and a half, 2 different deployments, for you and I to have, so we can impeach this guy. And if our elected leadership, our Congress and our senators from our states and the federal level don't want to do anything, we get rid of them and replace them. You see, when the American evangelical Christians, when the American Christians in general stand up and say we've had enough, there will be change, because whether they like it or not, Christians still have a major impact on elections. This is why Republicans go after the evangelical Christians. This is why the Democrats suddenly can quote Bible verses. Suddenly they go to church every Sunday, out of the blue. The only 2 candidates that I've seen out of all of them that I feel genuine, that they are actual believers in their lives demonstrated and they practice it, is Ted Cruz and Ben Carson. It's going to be one of those 2 that I vote for, because they're the only 2 that I've seen demonstration of the power of God in their lives. I saw a video today. Ted Cruz was, I don't know where he was at, but he was laying hands on and praying for a young man who lost his parents in a tragedy. That's not getting reported on the news. It was just a clip that I saw. I think somebody might have filmed it on their phone. It wasn't in it for publicity. It was not all over the place. He's doing it because that is his character. Ben Carson, he says he was such a hateful person, but he prayed and God changed his heart. And all these attacks that's coming against him from Donald Trump, who claims to be a Lutheran, claims to be a Christian, yet his language, his attitude, his mouth does not say that. It emanates pride. And the Bible says God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. And Dr. Ben Carson is humble. He's a humble man. And these attacks, he said, we just need to pray for them. When do you hear that from any political candidate? So, ladies and gentlemen, we as Christians in this nation have to stand up and get rid of the leadership that the world is mocking and laughing at, that the Egyptians were laughing at. They say Obama is destroying this nation and tearing it down, and I agree with them. I'm going to read you a report that came out. I got to read it off of my phone, so bear with me. This is on Truth in Media. It's titled Reality Check, Proof the U.S. Government Wanted ISIS to Emerge in Syria, by Ben Swan, November 19th, 2015. This was yesterday that this was posted. It says, the world's attention is fixed on Paris. France is tonight a police state. There is concern over ISIS infiltrating Syrian refugees. And of course, the big question, how will the world rid itself of the Islamic State? But before you listen to one more politician tell you what we need to do, you need to know what the politicians knew about ISIS 3 years ago and the actions they took. This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Listen up, ladies and gentlemen, because this is what the Sunni nations in America knew 3 years ago. It is one of the most viral discussions on the internet. The U.S. and its allies must stop ISIS. After the Paris attack that left 129 dead, which the account went up today to 130, more than 350 people injured, and an entire nation in lockdown, there is no doubt ISIS must be stopped. Shortly after the Paris attack, ISIS fighters recorded a new video claiming that they would soon strike the United States, specifically Washington, D.C., Times Square in New York. Look, there's no question that ISIS is a serious threat to people everywhere, especially to people in Iraq and Syria who have been decimated by the terror group. In Syria alone, 9 million people have been displaced and fled the country, which makes what I'm about to share with you infuriating. 7 pages of a secret Pentagon document were leaked earlier this year. The report is from 2012 and specifically examines the dangers of what the U.S. government is doing in Syria at the time. This is 2012. ISIS, as we know them today, did not exist then. Page 3 of those leaked up pages state 3 facts about the situation in Syria. 1. Internally, events are taking a clearer sectarian direction. 2. The Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is the ISIS now, are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. And 3. The West, the Gulf countries and Turkey, support the opposition, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. Excuse me. So to be clear, our Department of Defense in 2012 stated that the Russians, Chinese, and Iranians were supporting the Assad regime, and that the United States and Gulf partners like Qatar and Saudi Arabia were supporting the opposition to Bashar al-Assad. But the Department of Defense also made it clear that the majority forces driving the opposition were the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and something called the Salafist. Stay with me. If you don't know the term Salafist, the Salafist movement is an ultra-conservative Orthodox movement within Sunni Islam. The doctrine can be summed up as taking a fundamentalist approach to Islam. Salafist is the preferred term to another term used to describe these fundamentalists, the Islamic cult of Wahhabism, which is the dominating religion in Saudi Arabia, Wahhabism, from which ISIS draws their radical, violent, and merciless beliefs. Now, let's go back to that document, because after reading page 5 in section 8C, the Department of Defense reports warns, if the situation unravels, there's a possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered a strategic depth of the Shia expansion, in other words, Iraq and Iran. What you need to know is that, according to this leaked Department of Defense report, opposition forces, the United States, the Saudis, Jordan, Qatar, and more wanted a Salafist or fundamental Islamic group to take over eastern Syria in order to isolate and overthrow the Syrian President Assad's regime. It was a plan to overthrow Assad. 3 years later, today, Assad remains in power, and now the most violent radical terror group in the modern world that the modern world has ever known is entrenched in parts of Syria and Iraq while exporting terror to Europe. So here's the real question. Why would we as the American public believe any politician who claims to have a plan what to do with ISIS when no other leader has ever acknowledged where the group came from in the first place? Again, that is from truthinthemedia.com. I shared that on my personal Facebook page, so if you're friends with me on Facebook, you'll be able to find that link there. So what this leaked document, which is part of the Snowden leaks that occurred in 2012, what it's saying is that America and the Sunni allies wanted an Islamic State in Syria to be a counterbalance to Bashar al-Assad. That's what they wanted, and this is what they got. So is it a wonder that President Barack Obama denies 75% of the legitimate ISIS targets in Syria? It is a wonder that a year later, when we threatened to bomb them into oblivion, that we've done nothing about it. It is a wonder that the Syrian refugees are flooding Europe and flooding America. Did you know that a majority of the weapons, the IEDs, the bombs, the artillery shells, the assault rifles, the rocket launchers, the RPGs that was in Iraq in the hands of the insurgency, that's in Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, that those weapons come from Syria? Is it a wonder? Syria is the key in a lot of this. And all we've done by our own admission and by our own desire as a nation on the upper level, the elite of the country, is establish an Islamic State, a Sunni Islamic State, to counter the Shia revolution of Iraq, Iran, and Syria. And you could throw Russia and China in on that as well. That's the battle lines that have been drawn, folks. That's the battle lines in Syria, the next world war that's coming. It's a war between the Sunnis and the Shias. This is what my friend Mark Davidson writes in his book, Daniel Revisited. This is what it's about. This is the book of Daniel, chapter 7 and 8, coming to pass. The second and third beast of Daniel 7. The ram and the he-goat going at each other in Daniel chapter 8. This is what's going on. This is what is being set up. But more than this, on the American front, President Obama has been setting this up. Why do you think we have had all these riots over the past year and a half in the streets in Ferguson and Baltimore and different places? Why do you think we have this Black Lives Matter going on all over the nation? Why do you think this stuff is happening? Why do you think we're introducing a completely different culture with ideas that are radical because of their cultural differences coming into America? These are seeds being planted for revolt. Because at some point the American people are going to say enough is enough. And we're going to try to take back our nation. If 10% of the 10,000 refugees coming into this country are terrorists, that's 1,000 terrorists on our shore. That 10% is interesting because only 10% of the Syrian refugees say that ISIS is a major threat in the Middle East. Yet 41% of those think that the United States and Israel is the main threat in the Middle East. If 10% of those 10,000 coming, that's 1,000, would be terrorists. If 1%, that's 100 terrorists. Can you imagine what 100 of them will do when a handful of them killed 130 people and wounded 350 others in Paris, France last week? What do you think would happen in the streets of America if that happened? The nation of France shut their borders. They're a police state now. They are locked down. Over 500 raids have been conducted in the past week alone. What will happen in America if just 1% of those 10,000 are terrorists, which is the figure that the Department of Defense is going out there and saying, the FBI is saying 1%. That's 100. Excuse me. What are we going to do? The answer is simple. Martial law. Ladies and gentlemen, as soon as I'm sitting here, there is a good possibility that before the next election next year, that President Obama will have instigated some sort of red herring to create a situation where martial law can be imposed. That's what's happening right now. The Syrian refugee thing, that's just a part of it. This was all planned 3 years ago. They knew the Islamic State would come into power. They wanted it to come in power. And the refugee crisis is a direct result of the planning and the strategy and the willful desire of America and the Sunni nations trying to overthrow Assad in order to shift the balance of power to the growing Shia might coming out of Iran and Iraq. But ladies and gentlemen, all this is doing is setting us up for a third world war. Because now we have American troops on the deck as advisors to the good rebels and Russian jets bombing those positions. At what point do we stop and say this is insanity? If America did not want ISIS to be in power, we would have done something about it 3 years ago. But we've created this monster. We've allowed it to grow. We refuse to attack them the way we should. Yes, America is presenting the majority of the airstrikes right now against ISIS. Absolutely. But 75% of those airstrikes are denied by the president. The president's kicking out Iraqi Christians and opening up to 1,000 times more Muslim immigrants. Let me ask you this. Are they fleeing religious persecution? No! Who is? Christians in the Middle East, the Syrian Christians, the Iraqi Christians, the Yazidis. They're the ones that are being killed and slaughtered wholesale because they refuse to convert to Islam, because they refuse to pay the jizya tax. They're the ones that are being forced to leave so they have life. Those that aren't leaving are being crucified, burned alive, run over with tanks, stoned to death, shot. This is what's happening. So why are Sunni Muslims fleeing a Sunni regime? ISIS is Sunni. It doesn't make sense. Those who we should be protecting and giving asylum based on religious persecution are the ones we're sending back. And we're opening the doors to those who are just fleeing a war zone, but not religious persecution. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an important message for today, and this is the emergency warning I'm sending out right now over the waves, the internet. America, you will reap what you sow. The church has to be ready for this. The church is woefully ill-equipped to handle what's coming, to handle the fact that our women and children will be raped, to handle the fact that our men will be killed, our men and women will be dismantled, beheaded, will be stoned to death. We're ignoring this. We're not ready for it. We're not ready for persecution when the pastors will get thrown in jail. How in the world are we going to be ready for when our congregants begin to get killed? How do you prepare for that, Chris? Learn from from the Christians in the Middle East right now. Those who have been killed, they are faithful to the end. They stand for Christ. They still minister the gospel. They do it in love. I'm not telling you these things to harden your heart against them. I'm telling you these things to show you what's coming. Based on my experience overseas, based on fact from what's happened in Europe over the past few years, based on what the U.S. government is doing, we will not stop ISIS. It won't stop because of America. It'll stop because the Sunni coalition, led by Russia and Iran and Syria and Iraq and the Chinese, they're going to be the ones that'll crush this. It's not going to be America or our allies. Our Middle Eastern allies are Sunni, just as ISIS is Sunni. And they take their fundamental ideas from Wahhabism, which is the dominant religion in Saudi Arabia. Turkey supports them. Sunni Islam won't stop this. America won't stop it. But the Shias will. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready. The Third World War is coming. It's coming fast. And it's going to be in the Middle East. And it's going to be between Sunni and Shia nations. And the entire Middle East will be in flames. And America will be in flames because of all the internal chaos that's coming to our streets. Blood will flow in the streets, people. How will you as a Christian minister in a wartime environment? Ladies and gentlemen, believers everywhere, make no mistake, the church is at war. We are at war in the supernatural realm, fighting against the demonic spirits, the principalities, the rulers of darkness. We have to know what they're doing. We can't look at the individual person. We got to look at the spirit behind the person and fight that spirit, because this battle is not flesh and blood. This war is in the supernatural. This war is with the demonic forces that are flooding this nation. The demonic forces that the President of the United States have given the key to the country to. This is the time. This is our season. Warriors of Christ, stand up. Get your armor on. Suit up. Sharpen your sword. And go to battle. And do not sheathe your sword without blood of demons on that thing. That sounds pretty extreme. How many people would you hear say that? I'm a Marine. All right? And you got to accept that. That is what it is. But you get my point. This is not a physical battle. This is a spiritual battle. And we have to fight the demonic realm with the weapons of our warfare. And if we die in this battle in the physical realm, we live forever because we know who our Redeemer is. I would rather serve God on my feet, doing what He commanded me to do, than to compromise and turn a blind eye to this and let it happen. And then wonder why our nation is falling apart. I, for one, will be in the vanguard. I will be a watchman on the wall. I've stood for the defense in the physical of this nation, 2 combat deployments. And I stand in defense for the heart and soul of this nation in supernatural combat, in spiritual warfare. If that's you and you want to join me tonight, join me in this spiritual warfare, in this march to combat and pull down the strongholds that are coming into this nation and that are already in this nation, to tear down the walls that the enemy's setting up, the dividing walls, to come against the pillars of this culture that's in America and the culture that's coming, and win them from Christ. If that's you, if you want to do that, join me. Send me an email to this address coming across the screen right now, bootcampministries@gmail.com. Let's get together. Let's begin to come together as brothers and sisters in Christ across all denominational barriers. Let's begin coming together and sharing with each other our hearts. Let's begin praying for one another that we'll be strengthened. Let's begin getting teaching out there to believers to combat in the spiritual realm and to show the love of Christ in the face of persecution, in the face of terrible things that are coming, to show and demonstrate the love of God in Christ Jesus. Because that's what we're called to do. Don't take up arms. Don't get weapons and go after them. The Bible says if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Do not take up weapons and go out there and go on a hunting spree. If you have to defend your family, that's one thing. But you do not go out there and you do not murder. You do your battle in the spiritual. And that's where we'll keep it. That's where we're called to war. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining me tonight on this emergency broadcast on the Syrian Refugee Crisis in Europe, the root cause of it, which is America and Sunni coalition establishing a a caliphate, allowing it to exist and then watching it do what it does, allowing the infiltration into Europe and into America, encouraging these things so that the entire landscape will be changed in preparation for the coming Antichrist. Thank you so much for learning and getting this with me. Go to our website at bootcampministries.org. The website's going across the screen right now. Send us an email at bootcampministries@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook. Like our ministry on Facebook. It's Boot Camp Ministries. Or this show, the Shabbat War Room. You see, this is how we're going to begin to advertise and let people know when shows are coming on, and we're going to be pumping our videos there. You can find other Shabbat War Room broadcasts on CMV TV in the archives. Also on our YouTube channel, Boot Camp Ministries. Look it up. Go on there. We have about 30 some odd videos in there. You can go through it and see what you see and let us know how we can help you prepare for what's coming. Let me know what I can do to help. I would love to come out and minister wherever you're at. You know, if your pastor would like to, you can send me an email. I'd be more than willing to come out and sit down and talk with your congregation in detail about how we can get ready to expose the things that are going on and prepare us for this flood. It's coming, folks. It's coming. We got to be ready. We have to be watchmen on the wall. And we have to respond with the love of God in Christ Jesus. God bless you. Shabbat Shalom. And next week we will be airing a pre-recorded interview with Clayton Collins. So stay tuned for that. It will empower you. You will not regret it. God bless you. Thank you again. And have a great day. Shabbat Shalom.